you get me a damn brag with you.
We're going to get started here on our informational meeting. Thank you, Mike, from Holton Brothers for being here. Did I say that right? All right, we got one person on Zoom, and we're going to be recording this too.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Evening, everybody. For whoever didn't get my name, Mike Lemke with Holton Brothers. Holton Brothers is a masonry restoration contractor out of Grafton, Wisconsin, just north of Milwaukee. We service northern Chicago, Chicago and the northern suburbs, everywhere else in the state of Wisconsin, basically we service. We're a privately owned masonry company, family run for the last 47 years. They're in their second generation now. We already have third generation workers in the company itself. We're non-union. All our work is done in-house. We do not subcontract anything. So all of our guys that are going to be on site are actually Holton Brothers employees performing the work.
It doesn't impress me, non-union.
That's the big thing with that. Like I mentioned, Holton Brothers does work all across the state of Wisconsin, whether it be churches, hospitals, condo buildings, high rises. We do a lot of school work, but masonry restoration really is our specialty, where we're coming in on buildings like this, tuck pointing, caulking, brick repair, rebuilding facades. We don't do any new construction. We will rebuild, caulking, some coatings, but really the restoration aspect is where we've kind of made our money over the course of the last 50 years. And that's where we build our brand. We try not to stem too far out of that and get outside of our wheelhouse. My personal experience, I've been at Holton Brothers since '99. Right out of college, I started there. I've done everything from working in the warehouse and driving trucks to obviously now selling commercial masonry projects. Churches are something that we do a lot of. It's a unique building type with the bell towers, with the different architectural types going around the church. It's something that I think as a company have a lot of experience with. I did give Stan a couple references, but we've done everything from the $1 million projects down at Jesu at Marquette to St. Stanislaus to I'm working on Marquesan Bible Church up in Marquesan. I have one over in Watertown that's coming up that we're going to be working on, Emmanuel Lutheran, St. John's up in Sturgeon Bay. So it's something that Holton Brothers, I think, also has an extensive experience with in terms of running into these type of projects, knowing what to expect, knowing what to deal with, what we're going to come face to face with as we go through. The project itself, and Stan and myself are kind of addressing this, the church itself is in really good shape. For the age of the church and what's going on, there's really nothing that jumps out at you when you first look at the church of, hey, this is really falling apart, this is really in disarray. Kind of like I was just mentioning to Stan, there are areas. You start to run into some areas of some tuck pointing, some brick replacement where you actually see some spalled bricks, some window sealants, a couple window sills on the back, some tuck pointing spots. I had some pictures as well, which I can get in an email to Stan and he can send those out to everybody. But really just some sporadic miscellaneous maintenance items that unfortunately when you're dealing with two large bell towers and this large of a square foot of church, it's not a $100 fix, it's not a $200 fix. It does become an expensive project, even though the repairs aren't major anywhere, just due to the sheer square footage, some of it just the access that you need to be able to get to some of these areas and be able to do the work. Tuck pointing, that's one of the first things we have on here. I don't know how many of you got a chance to see the proposal, but tuck pointing is us going around the church. It's just the process of replacing cracked and deteriorated mortar. So any place that, as I walked around, and I kind of did a walkthrough with Stan probably a year ago now at least, we kind of walked through and identified some of these areas where the mortar starts to get deteriorated or a lot deeper than the adjacent mortar. I don't think you had, from what I remember and what I have in my notes, there wasn't a lot of step cracking, which you see in some buildings. Due to the age of the church, it was probably a softer mortar when it was put in, so you don't get a lot of the structural cracks and the step cracking. Most of it is that deteriorated pockets just due to water runoff, weathering, just kind of your natural erosion that starts to deepen out those joints. So tuck pointing, when we have it in here, is going around the entire church, both bell towers, grinding out any of those deteriorated joints, coming back in with new mortar after they're properly cleaned and re-tuck pointing to match the adjacent mortar. The brick replacement in there is exactly what it sounds like. There's some damaged brick, I know, up on the bell tower, a couple different areas. We had about 50 total in our quote that we identified. I think majority on the bell tower, where the faces have started to pop off. So they start to lose, obviously, some of their waterproofing qualities to some of their structural quality, that those would get taken out individually. Stan and myself just were having this conversation as well of matching brick. I know that was a concern, and then I kind of mentioned to Stan, anytime you're dealing a project with this, obviously the aesthetics become a big concern too after the cost is. It's finding brick that match, it's finding mortar that match. That's all stuff that once this boils down to, hey, Mike, we want you to do the project, then I start doing a little more legwork, running to the brickyards, dropping samples off here. We wouldn't throw anything in the church until whoever compromises the board decides to make that decision of this is what we want to move forward with. Both brick and mortar going back in. If there is going to be some caulking done in some of these areas, caulk colors can all be approved. That all can be approved prior to work commencing and going forward. So replacing a brick, tuck pointing a stone. The stone foundation did have some cracks, some areas where there was some deterioration. So not only tuck pointing the brick, but finding the same thing in the stone foundation around the church, repairing that. We did have, and I know at the request of Stan, I think just because of the bell tower, there was going to be some caulking on the bell tower windows. I don't know if that was an access. Do you remember why we had that conversation of the only reason I included was the bell tower at that time? Was that an access because we were going to be up there? Was that, okay. And I think, right, because we were inside and you could see out from the inside. I think that was kind of the general consensus when Stan and myself were here. If we're up there, we had looked at some interior bell tower work that needed to be patched and repaired. And at that time, we could tell that there was some definitive caulking that needed to be done around the louvers and the windows and the bell tower. So that would be included in here as well to remove any old sealants, prep the areas properly and reseal those areas up there. I know there's been some conversation, I think, amongst the board about potentially doing some more sealing, which could be done or added at that time or down the road as well. Like I mentioned, there's two really bad window sills over on the back corner of the church here that have started to really deteriorate and fall away. That's part of the scope of the work, to pull those old sills out, replace with similar sills. The other thing that we run into is just some caulking joints then in some of the decorative stone on the church, limestone sills, limestone copings, any of those sky joints, the joints that are comprised of the heavier, larger pieces of material, those end up being raked back and back and caulked just to allow for future movement down the road. That's the general scope. It's primarily in the bell towers, and then based on the price, I think you can see that as well. We had probably about 4 to 5 weeks per bell tower. Now that's for one man. We're going up in a lift. It's really not feasible to get 2 lifts on there or multiple guys in one lift. So it really comprises one man in the lift, approximately 4 to 5 weeks per bell tower. We'd have a lift going on each. So in regards to bell tower repairs, you potentially be looking at 4 to 5 weeks on site of getting up there and tackling all the work that we need to do there. The work around the church, we have a little bit more flexibility on just due to access. We can get a small scaffold tower out. We can do some ladders. We can do some different stuff where we can get a couple guys working on the church at the same time. Generally, we're running 2-man crews just due to the type of work we do. Like I mentioned, the bell towers, because the lifts would be 2. We might get a 3rd guy, but if it was a 2-man crew running around the church, we're probably looking at about 3 weeks to work our way around the church to complete all that work. We are a seasonal contractor, so this will come into play as you guys are making your decisions too of when do we sign, when can we get work in. We really don't want to do any masonry work or mortar work once temperatures get below freezing overnight. We're just starting to ramp up some stuff now, anticipating warmer weather, but in general, as we get to the beginning of November, we're starting to kind of wind stuff down and shut stuff down for the year. So that would be another factor to keep in mind, depending on when the board makes its decision. Some of it's obviously going to come into our current work schedule of what we can take on and where we can get to. But it's not a project that we would want to start on the bell towers in October, hoping for weather, especially with the utilization of lifts to access. Unfortunately, once you rent them, you're charged if you're shut down for 2 or 3 days or not. We do have a good working relationship with a lot of lift companies that we have some leeway, but it's not a project that we want to start as we're going into winter. We'd like to know that we have enough time to get that done and be out before we're really chancing any type of bad weather going forward. That's the majority of the scope of work. It's any type of masonry work, any type of restoration. It's no different than painting. It's no different than drywall. It's no different than a lot of the trades. It's attention to detail. It's coming back in and like we talked about, making sure that your material matches. It's making sure that as the guys are striking and finishing joints, that they're striking them the right way. That falls on our job foreman. Like I mentioned, we hire with no experience. We train all in-house. We're not going to have a guy with no experience up there pointing or caulking on the building, but The guys that we do have are all versed once they've gone through 1 or 2 years, because that's all we do. They're all versed in caulking, tuck pointing, brick replacement. There's really no true masons needed for this job, as we're not rebuilding or reconstructing a wall section. We're replacing individual bricking areas. So I know that's kind of the misnomer too of, hey, are you gonna have a mason out here? We have masons at our company, but we utilize our masons for parapet wall rebuilds, chimney rebuilds, facade rebuilds, stuff like that, as opposed to the individual brick replacement, which any of our guys can do going forward. So we do have guys that are just like any trade. We have guys that are probably better caulkers than they are tuck pointers. We have guys that are probably better tuck pointers than they are bricklayers. So we utilize that, and we pick guys out of our 120 guys, 110 guys to fit a project and put on there that are going to be able to handle anything that would come up on that project. Once we're on site continuously. The only thing that shuts us down is weather. During the working year, obviously rain is one of our big things that we can't really do anything when the wall's wet, when some of that moisture comes, but once we set up on a job, we are there until the job's complete, working continuously. I do oversight on the jobs. You will have a foreman on the job, probably Dan right out of our Madison area, but he's someone that you would be put in contact with the first day. He'd be able to answer any immediate questions relating to the immediate job site. I generally stop out anywhere from minimum once a week, if not twice a week on a job site. How are the guys doing? Checking quality control, just progress as we move along. I can also be reached anytime you need me. So I'm not hey, I'm going to sell this job and be invisible and gone for the rest of the project. But I'm not here every day either. It is going to be a couple of our workers. Like I mentioned, you will have a designated job foreman of hey, here's the first guy you go to. Not that you can't come to me, but we would work through him and myself as well to make sure that everything got handled and taken care of on the project. I want to go back and we can address, Stan gave me a list of questions from one of the parishioners I know who I think does some contracting, obviously, Stan. I'm going to put all of this in an email too. Like I mentioned, all told, we're probably about 120 employees. These were a couple of questions that Roger had. Our annual sales, I'd like to say that I'm privy to that off the top of my head. I'm not. I can probably guesstimate pretty well that we're anywhere between $15 and $20 million in the annual sales as a company. Like I mentioned, the duration of the project, if we were going to do the whole scope of work all together, we're probably about 7 to 8 weeks to work our way through both the bell towers and the church. The lifts, we were talking about this as well, and I know there was some conversation about potentially breaking down the scope of the project and doing maybe the bell towers and then the church separately. The lifts are 99% going to be utilized for the bell tower work. We do have some of the upper gables that we would use them for as well. Would they be used for the whole project? No. We would bring them in. We would use them for everything that we needed the lift for, though. Like I mentioned, any time where the lift is sitting idle, obviously it's just wasting money that we're getting charged for. So they wouldn't be used for the whole project, but we would get them in and out in as short of rental as we possibly could to lower that cost down. We handle lift costs separately. We don't upcharge. At the end of the job, when we get our lift invoices, I put this in here in the cost in the proposal as kind of a landmark of where we think to stand. But like I said, when the job's over, you guys can have those lift invoices. Here's exactly what we were charged from. I think right now we found our best prices at Franklin. Here's exactly what we were charged. This is what we're handing over to you, separate from the mason work for our mobilization costs. So that's something that you guys will be able to have hands-on as soon as the job is done and we get billed on that as well. I think we went over the people on site. Like I said, it's always 2 minimum. We may go as many as 3 or 4, depending on the time of year, how busy we are, how many guys we can get on a job site. We'd like to be able to throw 5 or 6. It's just we get strung out too and try and satisfy every customer we have, but minimum of 2 at a time. We went over the brick. There's a question about the proposal addressing all areas of the church that need repair. Short answer, yes. They address all the areas that I identified in a walkthrough and I kind of identify with Stan in my walkthrough of the church. Building this big, you can always get someone that's going to come back and say, hey, there's a little spot here, a hairline here. We do put some verbiage in our quote of, it doesn't include every hairline. It's not a 100% tuck pointing job. We're really going through and identifying some of these areas, like I said, of the deteriorated mortar, the pockets. You really have it I know around a couple of the big windows on the side. Like I mentioned, I'll include those pictures of some of the example areas. But that's really, in general, we're going around and what we're identifying as a masonry restoration company of these are the areas that need to be addressed and we think need to be taken care of at this time. Unfortunately, with any masonry repairs on a building this size, in general, you should be looking at doing this work in 30, 35 years without any further masonry repairs in those areas. That being said, building like this, you get a downspout that breaks, you get funny water runoff, you get snow that sits against the foundation for too long with salt in it, with freeze thaw, and you may get some deterioration in those areas. It's not an exact science. We're living in Wisconsin where we do get some extreme weather, especially when it comes to the masonry with the freeze thaw and the water penetration. We warranty our work. We have a 2-year labor and material. Industry standard is 1. Our work isn't going to fail, like I said, for a long time unless there's some extraneous circumstance involved where, like I said, you're getting some extreme water, some extreme runoff that's really starting to damage the masonry in that area. So really this should be for myself at 43 too. It should kind of be, hey, we did the masonry and I won't see you guys again until the 3rd generation of Holton is in here pitching the next guys on what they're going to do. There was a question, I know Roger had in here about the louvers. I think the trim being aluminum or wood. I think when I looked at them from the ground from binoculars, I thought that they were clad in aluminum. I'll put that in there. It really doesn't matter to us. It's the same process recaulking them, whether it's a aluminum trim louver or a wood trim louver. It's still removing of the sealants and putting in new. He did have a question in here, inside and out. I didn't have inside caulking. Regarding the louvers, that's something that can be done pretty easily as well. That's if they weren't caulked before, it's a pretty short thing, but it was exterior. I'll put that in there. He had an item in there about cleanup, and I think this goes to the entire job in general. I think Roger was more so specifying the interior of the bell tower and removing all our debris and getting it off the job site. Part of what we do, and like I said, we work on schools, we work on condos, apartments, people's houses. We do have a residential division that runs out of Milwaukee. We come onto a job site, and in general, I think for the most part, a lot of times we leave it probably cleaner than it was. Cleaning out gutters, cleaning out some of these valleys, raking up the areas on the ground where there was debris dropped down. Everything that we cause, any debris that's created will be disposed of off-site, cleaned, washed to the best of our abilities. Like I said, that in general, once the project is done, I think for the most part, the circumstantial stuff to the side, the lawns, the roofs, all that is going to be cleaned and taken care of to the point where, like I said, a lot of times it was cleaner than when we first started in some instances too. So I think those were the main questions. That's kind of our breakdown of work. I don't know if anyone has any other questions regarding the scope of work of the project. It really is, as opposed to a roof where you can measure square footage and say, 1,000 square feet, here's exactly what you're bidding, give us a cost on all the same thing. It really is each individual estimator coming in, taking his walk around, here's what I identify as bad. For me too, it's here's my guys that I think are gonna go on it, here's how long I think it's gonna take them to get through the process. I don't wanna say there's no right or wrong. I know you have another contractor or two that are coming into bid, and there's gonna be some variations of how long they think it might take versus how long we think it might take. I don't know if there's a right or wrong for that. It's just, like I said, experience of looking at a building. Here's what I think for my guys, and here's the cost that we need to bill out in order to get the project done. And that's why, unfortunately, like I mentioned, on a building like this, you may get a cost that's our cost. You may get a cost that's 20 grand lower. You may get a cost that's 20 grand higher. I think you guys are really doing a good job as much as you can of trying to apples to apples work and make sure that everything is comparable in the quote, which is really all you can do in terms of vetting scope of work and what you're going to get done for the cost involved. So, and that's something that I know Stan and myself had a brief conversation about too. That'll be a lot of you guys and myself walking around of okay, hey, we hit X in the proposal, everything was taken care of. That if you sign off and know that you're spending potentially, almost 6 figures to do a project, that you got your dollars worth out of the end. Probably the last good thing, and I like this as a selling point for Holton Brothers, signed contract is all we need to do the work. We don't require any deposits up front. We don't take any money down. On a project like this, it's not even big enough that we would really do a progress billing. So money-wise coming to us, until a project's done and punch list stuff is completed and you guys are happy with it, we don't send out a bill. So I just like that as a selling point of, hey, look, I'm not taking 50% of your money and who knows when I'm going to show up, who knows when I'm going to be here, and who knows what quality of work you're going to get. In all reality, project's done, we do a walkthrough, you guys sign off, say, okay, looks good. We submit a bill. We do ask for net 30 billing in full once the project is complete. With any type of church, we can string that out. So if it ends up being a few months, if it needs to be strung out from process payments or whatever it may be, we can do that as well and accommodate that, as long as there's some communication of, hey, can we bill this out at this time and do another payment down the road? We're fine doing that as well. Any other questions that come to mind immediately, or yes?
I was just curious if some brick does need to be replaced. In your experience, how hard is it to get a good match with the kind of brick we have here?
Not too hard, and I say that in general because a lot of your brick replacement is up higher too. So it's not going to be a texture thing down low, and obviously we're going to match that in shaded color. They do have a lot of brick. You know, I go into brick yards and they have thousands of panels there to choose from. Being that we're doing individual replacement, like I said, spot replacement of a few brick here and there, and the fact that it's red, still a fairly common color. We're having trouble running in some of the browns and some of the other colors like that, but red brick is still obviously one of your most common colors that you're going to see out there. Fairly easy to find. There is now what they've started to do, just because of the overhead cost of brick yards. They used to carry a ton of brick in their yard at the time. And I used to be able to go into a yard and walk through all their rows with a brick sample and pick out 10 brick if I wanted it, 20 brick if I wanted it, 50 brick if I wanted it. They've changed all that. Just companies aren't carrying the brick overhead. They don't want that upfront cost sitting in their yard, not knowing when they're going to get paid for it. So unfortunately, what's going on now is a lot of the brick costs are 1 cube minimums, 525 pieces, minimum order. Now that's not really going to change anything for us. You know, I mentioned that to Stan as well too. He said you had some backstock, but on a church this size, if we can find a match, we use what we use, and then if there is a place to store some as well, to have some backstock of a matching brick isn't bad. I don't anticipate any problems for the 50 brick, even if it turns into 75 or 100 brick that we end up having to replace. Finding a match that you guys are going to be happy with.
You know, if they can find extra brick to store them in
Yeah,
the garage or
Definitely, yeah.
I guess I got a question. If I can't read my own writing, but when could you start this job? How soon do we have to? What kind of time frame do we have to decide? I mean, to come down to how are you fixed for work at the moment, I guess is my
We're
question.
busy, Stan.
Yeah, and you're busy.
And surprisingly, construction itself, ever since we got out of 2008, 2009, really starting in 2012, has been busy from everyone I talked to, whether it be your roofers, your general contractors, masons, no doubt. With all the school referendum money that came, we've really been busy and have been blessed to continually have a workload that we've carried over into next year. So I've carried over a fair amount into this year. I've come up with a few large projects. Like I said, we're talking a pretty large condo complex down in Madison. We're doing the Hyatt Hotel up in Green Bay. We're doing Stevens Point High School. Just all kind of stuff in my area that kind of monopolizes a few of the guys that I have. So right now, if you guys came to me in the next month and said, hey, Mike, let's go ahead, we want to sign up and do it, we'd probably be looking for starting somewhere in July. All right. That could change at any point. I mean, to be honest with you, you could come to me in another month and say, okay, Mike, we're ready to go. And I might say, hey, look, now we're pushed back 2 months or 3 months. Too.
Right, yeah. I just wanted to know, and you've answered it very well. It's nominally, you could say July today, but maybe in 3 weeks, you might not be able to say September. You just don't know.
And I don't want to scare you guys off, and maybe it does, and I understand that, it's a project that you're starting to plan and budget for, and you want to have a timeline, and we want to get it done. Once money's there at any church, and we did some projects on ours too, where I know once the money's sitting there, you want to use it for that project, because otherwise it starts getting, I think, grabbed for other stuff that becomes more of an immediate need. two different things for me. Like I said, unfortunately, I don't know how my schedule is going to fall.
Sure.
You know, right now I'm looking at in this Madison area, I'm not booked for the year. I'm probably out to about July. Like I mentioned, we then have only, you know, I'm looking to get work up until about Thanksgiving, and then how long does that take? It could be 1 or 2 projects in the next week, and I could be telling you, hey, look, I'm booked out. I would say there's 2 big benefits that you have. One, our cost isn't really going to change from 1 year to the next, because I don't anticipate your work changing from 1 year to the next dramatically to the point where all of a sudden I'm going to come next year and say, now it's 20% higher or 30% higher. So if it gets to that point, and it does need to be pushed back, at least from our standpoint, I wouldn't be concerned about
My first one.
further cost or further deterioration
Okay, hold on.
going forward into a following year. It would just more so be the church of, hey, we really want to get it done this year, and if that's the case, you know, I get it. We lose contracts to people plenty that we just can't get there when they want us there. You know, I'm turning down private bids and public bids all the time because I just know our schedule won't allow it. So I understand that happens too. But yeah, the best I can tell you is, you know, you give me a call if you're thinking about it that day, and I can tell you pretty much exactly where I am and whether I could get it in that year.
Anybody else?
I guess how long do you anticipate, I didn't quite hear, how long do you, when you start the process, from start to finish, or how long
To kind of break it down into 2 different areas, the bell towers itself would be about 4 to 5 weeks on site. So we would have 2 men, 2 lifts going, 1 on each bell tower at a time. And the total project to do the 2 bell towers with those 2 men would be about 4 to 5 weeks. Going to the church, then, like I mentioned, we get, for the sake of giving you a number, we would have, if it was 2 men, which is our minimum, we'd probably be looking at 3 weeks or so to move our way around the church to complete the rest of the church work. So if all told, if we were going to start in the beginning and do all of it, we might be looking at, you know, like approximately 2 months worth of work. You know, I kind of the same thing. I know that seems like a long time, and we'd love to be able to throw a lot more guys at it. And sometimes we can get a couple more on, sometimes we can't. We'll accommodate any church schedule we can. You know, we were working out at St. Norbert's in Roxbury last year, and they would have, I think it was Wednesday morning services from 8 to 9. We'll accommodate that. We accommodate the different aspects of the church to be able to allow for that to be functioning and moving. So, you know, if you guys know that, hey, during the week, we're going to have, that's another good thing too. Our general work hours during the week, the guys are working, once we get going, we try and give them 4 10-hour days, especially as we get into some of the outer areas of Wisconsin, so they can get done with their work and go back. 4 10-hour days. If we do get rain during those 4 days and they don't get their hours, the guys will work Friday. Once we're actually going to, we give the guys the option to work overtime for 45 hours, and they may work half day Friday regardless. But in general, we're Monday through Friday, we're working that 7 to 5:30 work schedule. If there's a problem with that, we can accommodate to whatever work schedule you guys need. If we don't want to start making noise until 8 or we need to shut down earlier, we can do that. We generally don't do weekend work unless there's a specific need for it, or unless we do lose, once again, numerous days during the week to weather. The guys will then work Saturdays to make up for some of the lost hours that they didn't get during the week. But like I mentioned, in general, it's that 7 to 5:30 range. And like I mentioned, we can accommodate a lot of stuff with where we're working. We can do, if you know that you're going to have a service or some meeting or something like that, there's a lot of times a lot of work that we can do that is non-noise related, whether it actually be putting mortar back in the wall. We don't need to be grinding at those times or chipping or doing noise work when you guys are trying to accommodate a service or accommodate something in the church either. So we can work around that as well.
So in light of that, when is the latest you could start a project for this year? Because you're saying in October,
Okay.
you don't want to
He's
be
not really showing
working
that
at that
picture, so you
time.
can hear what it
Well,
said.
October's still good. You're self enough, and I say this because if you work, like I'm going to go Claire next week instead of a job in the hospital, we worked up in Annabelle.
Did he get to
I
any
basically know that
photos?
anything
Attention.
kind of is, for lack of better terms, we get north of Madison.
It was right
No,
now.
but it's not that.
I shoot for ending my year about Halloween, just because that's when the temps start to get too questionable for me to see. Down here, closer to that, we might get another couple of weeks, and we might be able to go to mid-November. Taking the bell tower project is is kind of own individual work right now, where we might be looking at 4 to 5 weeks worth of work. I probably wouldn't want to start that any later than beginning of September, Labor Day. You know, that accounts for some rain, that accounts for potentially some missed days, that lets us get done in plenty of time. I know we're not into November yet with that 4 to 5 weeks, but that would give us plenty of time to kind of wrap up this. The big thing with the lifts, it's funny the way they break down the schedule, but once you rented a lift for 2 days, you've already paid for a week's work. Once you rented a lift for a week and 2 days, you paid for 2 weeks. Once you had 2 weeks, you paid for a month. So what we want to avoid is having a lift for 2 weeks, we basically get 2 weeks free, and all of a sudden, we can't utilize it, and weather shuts us down. I just want to make sure that if we are bringing lifts in, we're not chancing any weather out.
But I'm not going to leave because then
A
they'll
lot
see
of
my
jobs,
name.
we're just doing ladder or staff.
Please.
That
That wouldn't be
shut
nice.
down for 4 or 5 days, or kind of remobilize it from that later. This one being lifts, ideally, like I said, every day, is kind of make sure that we were completely down, cleaned out and everything before there was a chance for kind of weather shutting down. That's not hard and fast either, but that's kind of my, you know, if all of a sudden we're a week later to mid-September, you know, we're not bad, but you know, I wouldn't want to push it. So, and I guess that being said, depends how bad the church wants to get it done. Once again, like I said, the lift cost, and we can go over this a little bit more. There are more lift breakdowns and costs other than just the 1 month rental. So I guess that being said, if they want us to come in and potentially do 2 weeks, and we could get 2 weeks in and we had to shut down, we could. Like I mentioned, it would just be a shame of not being able to utilize the rate for the lift that you had to be able to kind of salvage that cost and get some more work in for essentially what's a free lift at that point. Anything else off the top of your head?
Anything up there on Zoom?
No, we're good.
You're good?
I'm gonna go back through the questions that Roger put together. Stan gave me on a list here, so I will do a couple different things too. I don't know if, like I mentioned, if any of you have seen the proposal, but I know Stan has that, obviously, with the verbiage and the wording in there. The list of questions in here, I will go back and kind of answer these directly in an email as well that can be shared with whichever the board members or whoever in the congregation or church wants to see that. I know you had the pictures initially that I sent, just kind of depicting some of the work areas. Okay, and I can resend those in an email as well. That way, whoever wants to look at some of the pictures that are kind of depicting the areas of the scope of work, we can, the answer to some of the questions in here, that can all be kind of sent to who's ever requesting it. You know, Stan obviously knows how to get in touch with me, but feel free, share my cell phone number, share my email. Anyone who wants to reach out to me directly too can do that as well.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mike, for joining us tonight.
No problem, guys.
We
Thank you very much
appreciate the
for having me.
information.
Like I said, I appreciate the work you guys are trying to do to really know what you're getting for the cost. I'd much rather have this than get to the end of a project and kind of have the congregation and the church sit there and say, what did we get? What did you do?
Yeah.
Because in a lot of cases, like I mentioned, that's one of the big things. Our goal is to essentially leave and really nothing's changed other than your work's prepared, but you don't get a brand new entryway like you put up however many years ago. You don't get brand new windows, but you're not getting a new product that everyone can kind of look at and say, look how this is new and different and changed and beautiful. It's really, to a lot of people, they're going to show up on site and say,
What happened?
it doesn't look too much different. Like I mentioned, it's kind of a curse of our trade that it's not something falling apart that catches the eye that, hey, we put it back together and it's brand new. So to be able to do your legwork and kind of show some of these people these areas that, hey, here's what we're spending money on, this is what we're doing, that they know when the project's done of, this was kind of the finished product. And you know, once again, it's easy for me to stress because I see masonry and I see the various degrees of degradation and falling apart that can occur from year to year to year. So like I mentioned, a lot of the stuff may seem minor to a lot of people. And that being said, like I mentioned, it's not like it's going to fall apart on you tomorrow. It seems minor to a lot of people, but it can turn into large scale projects. you know, and unfortunately, it's a kind of a necessary evil to keep up on the masonry to avoid from that happening. You know, Christ Presbyterian turned into a plus six-figure job, and Roxbury turned into, I don't even want to know what they spent on all the trades out there, but, you know, we were a few $100,000 in masonry on that church alone just due to,
They were a
you
few.
know, neglect and
$100,000
lack of
mark.
repairs and maintenance. So, in order to be able to keep up on it, it is,
I didn't hear a number
you know,
yet. did
kind of
you?
as important as anything else too. So, perfect. Let me know. I'll get that stuff out to Stan in the next couple days. Like I mentioned, no rush with anything, but if you do get to the point where you have more questions, let me know. And if it gets to the point where you do really start getting close to, we're going to decide one way or another, touch base with me on time frame then too. And that way I can give you at that moment, whether it's 2 weeks from now or 2 months from now, I can give you a definitive timeline again of this is where we stand in terms of being able to come in and get the work